2 weeks ago, after what seemed to be an endless drought, we hit the fields to break up some dirt and to spread some seed. Fortunately, we were able to get quite a bit of rain, and you'll be able to see a significant difference from when we spread the seed until now. We used a seed combination which was mostly winter rye for the platform plots. We added to the winter rye some additional brassicas as well as separate purple top turnips and radish seed. With the north part of the platform, we added actually a little bit extra red clover seed since we were looking at pretty bare ground and wanted to cover things as best we could. 'With the help of Hurricane Helene and all the rain that we had for days and days, we got pretty good germination and pretty good cover for most of the entire north portion of the platform plot. 2 weeks ago, when we went to do the food plots, we crossed the creek, which was completely dry and covered in leaves. With the rain that we received, at least we have a trickle of a stream going down through the creek bed. The ponds, however, are still fairly low as far as their water level. Creekfield plot, which runs along the north side of the creek on its westernmost aspect of our property, had a little bit more vegetation and a lot more thatch when we were finished with it 2 weeks ago. For the Creekfield plot, we used primarily winter wheat with oats and brassicas. We also added some red clover to the mix to make things a little bit better. Several days after we got the seed down, the turkeys were scratching and feasting upon all the seed before we got the heavy rains from the hurricane. Once we got some moisture on the ground, the winter rye began to germinate fairly quick and attracted the deer right off the bat with all the small, tiny shoots. The winter rye seemed to be almost like candy to the kids for the deer. And initially, as we looked at it, it seemed that we might not have very much of a plot left the way that they were grazing on the winter rye as soon as it was coming up. Deer constantly grazing each day, the winter wheat seemed to continue to grow and fill in a little bit in some of the patchy areas. As the winter wheat got taller and began to fill in the areas and a little bit thicker, didn't take long for the bigger guys to come in to start joining in on the buffet. This one particular 9 point considered it almost a challenge to take in as much of the winter wheat that he could to fill his belly. Although you can see the does up close to the camera, that 9 point is still off a little bit further at the south end of the food plot where he continued to graze quite a bit. 11 days out from when we first spread the seed, despite the fact that there was almost constant grazing by the deer as well as by the turkeys, the winter rye seems to be fairly well established and is becoming a lot more lush and taller. 2 weeks to the day from when we first spread the seed, the rye is actually pretty much a carpet over almost all of the platform plot. The creek field was seeded with winter wheat and had a fair amount of remaining thatch, despite the fact that we used the chain harrow to reduce that as much as possible. Despite the thatch, the winter wheat germinated well and the deer were hitting it, similar to the way they were hitting the winter rye up at the platform plot. Within 2 weeks of seeding, the wheat was breaking through all the thatch and starting to really green up. This started attracting some of the bucks who started working on the buffet in the creek field plot. Kimber had to check out the food plot when we went up to swap out the discs in the cameras. I noted that the brassicas and the clover are just starting to emerge between the tufts of the winter rye at this point. In no time, they will be taking off, and this area should be a pretty good plot for the rest of the year.